第2部は、ナショナルアートミュージアムのこれからということで、第1部で文化政策、美術館政策にも若干近づけた形でお話をいただきましたけれども、第2部でも引き続き、大きなナショナルミュージアムの各国におけるマッピングをしていただきながら、とりわけコロナ禍を経た新しい試み、あるいは未来に向けた持続可能なこのナショナルアートミュージアムの在り方とは何かということについてお三方にお話しいただきます。最初はケイウィン・フェルドマンさん、ナショナルギャラリー・オブ・アート、ワシントンのナショナルギャラリーですね。それから2番目がナショナルギャラリー・ロンドンの館長のガブリエレ・フェナルディさん。そして3番目に国立西洋美術館の館長で、独立行政法人国立美術館の理事も務められている田中正幸館長にお話をいただきます。それでは、ケイウィン・フェルドマンさんを壇上にお迎えしたいと思います。拍手でお迎えください。
I'd like to start by thanking the National Art Center and the National Center for Art Research for hosting today. I've had a lovely warm welcome to Tokyo from our colleagues, and I appreciate the many kindnesses. I have long had a great affection and interest for Japanese art and culture. And it's been delightful to be here for a few days and experience your wonderful, wonderful museums. It's been an honor and a pleasure. After I was approached in 2018 about the opportunity to lead the National Gallery in Washington, I asked a mentor for advice. I had always worked in museums that were deeply embedded in a single community, and I didn't know how to approach a national institution. My friend leaned forward with excitement. Yes, but the nation becomes your community. And what does that mean? I got very excited. I love a challenge. I arrived at the National Gallery almost 5 years ago and have been thinking ever since about what it means to be a national museum, especially in today's volatile and divided world. The institution I inherited was firmly fixed in the last century, and this static position was deliberate. The museum operated on the guiding principle that a national collection should never change, that is to say, be timeless and separate from society. This idea was rooted in the idea that excellence is fixed and absolute. But can anything be truly timeless in an ever-changing world? Processes of industrialization, demographic change, technological innovation, and human-induced environmental destruction all occurred more rapidly in the last 20 years than ever before. Societal transformation is now happening at an exponential rate, and it's global. Most importantly for museums, these changes are leading to modified behavior and expectations in our audiences. What do our audiences today want from us? People's worldview is very different today from that at the end of the 20th century, reflecting our ever-revolving world. And what about future audiences and changing ideas of excellence and national service? As a national museum, we must consider how we preserve our founding values and core principles while also adapting and innovating in a volatile world. And how can we reflect the original patriotic and generous spirit implied by the word national while resisting the more exclusionary and isolationist nationalism that we find so frightening today? In my time with you today, I'd like to give you a very brief overview of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., and how it has responded to contemporary society, locally and nationally, over time. I'd also like to think about how national museums must change and adapt in today's world. Our founder, Andrew W. Mellon, made his fortune through banking and industrialization in the late 19th century. And in 1936, Mellon wrote to President Roosevelt, suggesting that America needed a national gallery and offering to donate his collection and all of the necessary money to build it. Mellon planned a museum modeled exactly on the National Gallery in London. He envisioned an institution focused largely on pre-1900 European masterpiece paintings, and with a very small collection of exceptional American paintings that were made in the European tradition. We are unusual among large American art museums in that we don't also have historic Asian, African, or Latin American collections. Mellon's offer was accepted by the President and Congress and began on the John Russell Pope-designed neoclassical building in 1937, and then we opened to the public in 1941. Mellon demonstrated the importance of a really big vision. He created a building so large that we occupied less than 40% of it when we opened. His hypothesis was that American generosity would soon fill all of the galleries, and it's proven true. We opened with just 546 works, and 82 years later, we hold over 160,000 works of art in trust for the nation. Mellon embodied generosity. He gave his collection and all the money to build the building, but insisted that his name not be on the building. We may be one of the only national galleries to be founded by a single individual saying to the nation, "Here, start a national gallery." Grand marble-clad neoclassical museum buildings are often criticized today for being intimidating and elitist. I think, however, that Mellon's gesture was truly populist. He believed that all people, regardless of background, education, or social standing, deserve magnificence. And he ensured that we would always be completely free of charge. Andrew Mellon's children shared his big vision, boundless generosity, and commitment to excellence. They also recognized the need for the museum to be of its time and to serve the needs of contemporary audiences, growing in usefulness and importance to artists, scholars, and the general public. What did it mean to be useful to Americans during the 1950s, 60s, and 70s? This period was, of course, the height of the Cold War, a time of ideological and political struggle. The United States and her allies created NATO and promoted a global policy of containment. It was a war fought with propaganda, espionage, sports rivalry, and the space race. And culture, of course, fit into the rivalry and patriotism of the time. One of the gallery's most historic moments was the loan of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa from the Louvre in 1963. This special one-picture loan was made directly to the President of the United States by the President of France. All arrangements were handled by the White House, and each visitor filed past and had just 4 seconds to look at the Mona Lisa. So from our earliest days, cultural diplomacy has been an important part of the work of a national museum. And of course, 11 years after the Mona Lisa came to Washington, she came to Tokyo and was on view at the National Museum here. This period did not only see geopolitical tension with the Cold War, but also strain at home. The Vietnam War, the Civil Rights struggle, and the assassinations of President Kennedy, Dr. King, and Robert Kennedy brought protest and produced counterculture. How might a national gallery respond to this period? These images of Vietnam War protesters sleeping in the middle of the National Gallery warms my heart. They also make me think of these photos taken in 1941 of servicemen resting in the gallery. So clearly, part of our role as a national gallery is to provide rest when citizens participating in democracy just need a break. It was a difficult period for Washington, D.C. Civil unrest and economic recession strained the city. Three magical elements coalesced in the 1970s that enabled the gallery to respond to the times. A spot of vacant land on the mall, the philanthropic commitment of the Mellons to pay for a new building, and the appointment of a charismatic director, J. Carter Brown. The East Building opened in 1978, designed by I.M. Pei. Located immediately across from the United States Capitol, Pei and Brown conceived of a welcoming institution to embody the democratic spirit. It was envisioned as a kind of town square, elevating visitors beyond their routine concerns. At the dedication of the East Building in 1978, President Carter, referring to the building as an emblem of our national life, said, "This building tells us something about ourselves, about the role of art in our lives, about the relations between public life and the life of art, and about the maturing of an American civilization." Brown recognized that the gallery's European and American focus limited the museum's ability to tell a global story. And we do exhibitions from lands around the world, including exhibitions from Japan, such as recent exhibitions, Animals in Japanese Art and paintings by Ito Jakuchu. The East Building enabled the gallery to pursue a collection of modern art and hired its first curator of modern art in 1974. The initial opportunity was to manage 5 major commissions in the East Building of singular works by Alexander Calder, Juan Miró, Anthony Caro, Robert Motherwell, and Henry Moore. At this time, we purchased Jackson Pollock's painting Lavender Mist, one of the artist's most important drip paintings. Another milestone for the gallery's expansion into modern art occurred in 1986 when the Rothko Foundation donated over 1,000 paintings and works on paper by Mark Rothko. We lend paintings by Rothko all over the world, including nearly 30 to Japan in recent years. Today, we recognize that there are additional qualities that enable a museum to be the standard bearer of excellence. An excellent museum must also be a diverse and inclusive museum. Since 2000, the gallery has made leaps in expanding the collection of works by African American artists. Significant additions include Kerry James Marshall, Great America, Glenn Ligon's The Flag is, Glenn Ligon, Untitled, and one of Faith Ringgold's most iconic paintings, The Flag is Bleeding. We've also begun to add contemporary works by Native American artists, including this powerful collage by Jean Quick-to-See Smith called Target. I'm still thinking about how we might be a museum to serve the American people. How can one institution with a distinct history and located in a very specific location truly reflect and attract over 300 million people? It's an even more complicated question today than it was when we opened. American demographics have changed from a nation that was 90% white in 1941 to just 60% white today. Within the next 20 years, America's population will become majority people of color. I think this scale of democratic change sets us apart from many other nations now. Historically, our audience focus has been serving the 4 to 5 million people who walk through our doors each year. Increasingly, we seek to serve Americans across the entire nation directly in the communities in which they live. This means expanded digital programming, offering greater access to our collection, scholarship, and programs online. Of course, we're particularly interested in reaching more teachers and students in classrooms across the nation. Finally, we're also thinking about the ways that we can get our collection out in an increased number of ways, looking at long-term collection loans to regional museums across the country. Museums should be sharers, not hoarders. In addition to exciting opportunities, I'm thinking about threats, and climate change is my greatest concern. Many of the root causes of climate change, including loss of natural habitats and expanding disease vectors, also increase the risk of pandemics. Museums are certainly participating in this gradual destruction of the environment, or maybe not so gradual. Most of us have aged buildings that were never built for sustainability and consume vast quantities of energy with astonishing inefficiency. Our staff travels nonstop, as I'm here in Tokyo with you today, and art is moved by truck and airplane every day all over the globe. Exhibitions are constructed and demolished every 3 months. The last few years of wildfires, epic storms, global warming, rising seas, human migration, and a pandemic have changed my thinking about our museum's priorities. And I realize that we are seeing the real effects of the climate crisis impact museum operations in real time. Reducing our carbon footprint and embedding sustainable thinking in everything we do is our responsibility. Art museums are so good at considering the lives of the people who came before us, but we don't think about the generations of people who will come after us. Empathy scholar Roman Krishnarik wrote that, quote, "We have colonized the future. In wealthy countries especially, we treat it like a distant outpost where we can freely dump ecological damage and technological risk, as if there was nobody there. We are all living through a disaster that is speeding up, and the impact, financial and otherwise, on museums will only increase and at an exponential rate." The other threat, but also opportunity, that I believe all museums, especially national museums, must grapple with is artificial intelligence. Imagine for a moment that today's children and every generation after will never know a time when computers didn't talk with them in their own language. They'll never know a time when their digital skills or existing knowledge were a barrier to exploring a new idea. And they'll never experience a time when computers were considered inanimate machines instead of helpful teammates, companions, and skilled assistants. With the advent of generative AI taking hold on the public consciousness, we are standing on a new precipice of change. Not since the explosion of the internet some 30 years ago have we seen a technology so completely change our relationship to knowledge, to each other, and to our own ability to create and explore in new ways. If AI promises to relieve all of us from the digital drudgery that fills so much of our days, it also clearly lacks the human intuition and appreciation for beauty and the sublime that have inspired every great civilization. If time is suddenly no longer the limiting factor on our achievement, then the real and meaningful questions will turn back to what, therefore, should be achieved at all. Absent the role of the arts in our lives, the answers will invariably fall in line with what garners the most power and profit for a select few and leaves us all vastly poorer as a result. How might our own collections support training these systems on the multiple perspectives of artists and historical events that are so often left out of history books? Rather than assuming that the machines will tell us the right answer, how could we continue to engage the citizens around us to think for themselves and to stay in touch with the essential but intangible value that art brings to a well-lived life? How could this encourage us to bring more of the cultural and moral aspects of achievement into focus instead of fixating on the ever upward spiraling questions of how high, how much, and how many? All the more reason why we as national museums should embrace the complex lives and stories of artists and the objects they've created. We see that many artists seem to revel in confounding the rules and being fit into a data model. Perhaps this defiance is part and parcel of our own human and indomitable spirit. What would it look like to train AI on that? I conclude my comments today with a 1965 quote from President Lyndon B. Johnson. Art is a nation's most precious heritage. For it is in our works of art that we reveal to ourselves and to others the inner vision which guides us as a nation. And where there is no vision, people perish. Thank you.